This is the third video in a series on protein needs in disease states. It explores how a pressure injury affects protein turnover, and it provides recommendations for intake. Now that we've covered the basics of protein turnover, the RDA, and recommendations for older adults, cirrhosis, and chronic kidney disease, we're going to explore the protein needs with a pressure injury. Once again, the intent won't be to provide a comprehensive overview of the condition. It's really just to outline how protein turnover is affected and discuss the current view on the recommended intake. Much of the information from this video will come from a document called Prevention and Treatment of Pressure Ulcers/Injuries, Clinical Practice Guideline. This is also known as the International Guideline, and it was published in 2019 as a joint effort between the European Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel, the National Pressure Injury Advisory Panel, the Pan-Pacific Pressure Injury Alliance, and 14 other wound organizations from 12 different countries. The current edition is the third edition. It's preceded by the first edition and second edition, which were published in 2009 and 2014 respectively. As indicated by the title, the International Guideline sets the standards for the prevention and treatment of pressure injuries, and is cited in most textbook chapters and research papers on this topic. According to the International Guideline, a pressure injury is defined as localized damage to the skin and/or underlying tissue as a result of pressure or pressure in combination with shear. Pressure injuries typically occur over a bony prominence to areas like the heel and ankle, sacrum, ischium, and greater trochanter, elbow, scapula, and occipital bone. They develop because of the forces of a person's own body weight, the forces applied by a medical device or other object, or some combination of both. A full discussion of the factors that lead to tissue breakdown is beyond the scope of this video, but they include reduced blood flow to the tissue, resulting in a decreased delivery of nutrients and removal of waste, direct mechanical insult to the cells, and local changes to the skin's moisture level and temperature. The severity of a pressure injury can be described using a classification system with 4 stages. Stage 1 is the least severe, and it's marked by intact skin with non-blanchable redness, which means it doesn't turn white or pale when it's pressed. Stage 4 is the most severe, and it's characterized by full thickness tissue loss, not only to the skin, but also extending into the muscle and possibly down to the bone. In addition to the 4 stages, there's the unstageable pressure injury, in which the true depth is unknown due to the presence of slough and eschar, and there's the suspected deep tissue injury, which is more like a bruise, but results from pressure and/or shear instead of trauma. While adequate energy and protein intake are important for the prevention of pressure injuries, this video is focused on the healing of pressure injuries that already exist. Protein is a key component of this process because the cells and tissues needed for wound healing are synthesized from the amino acid pool. Looking at the image of protein turnover from the first segment of this video series, we can see how an increased demand for protein synthesis will pull from the amino acid pool, resulting in an increased demand from the sources that supply it. Therefore, increased intake from dietary sources is necessary to avoid undesirable breakdown of skeletal muscle. In the case of severe malnutrition where muscle mass is low, failure to consume adequate protein will prevent the wound from healing at all. To examine this a little bit closer, we can review the basics of skin tissue. The skin is made up of 3 separate layers. The outermost layer is the epidermis, and it's composed primarily of keratinocytes. These cells produce keratin, which is a fibrous protein that serves as protection against foreign invaders, ultraviolet light, and the loss of fluid. The middle layer is the dermis. The principal structural component of this layer is collagen, which is produced by cells called fibroblasts. It's also home to another structural protein called elastin and other protein-containing components like blood vessels and sweat glands. Finally, the innermost layer is the hypodermis. This layer anchors the dermis to the muscle and bone, and like the dermis, it consists of collagen and elastin, but it also consists of adipose tissue. As you can see, any wound can lead to the destruction of body proteins like keratin, collagen, and elastin, and the keratinocytes and fibroblasts that produce them. Furthermore, you can see that the wider and deeper a wound is, the more of these cells and proteins the body will need to produce to heal it. Nevertheless, this only reveals one aspect of the wound healing process. Another aspect to consider is the immune response that occurs shortly after the injury occurs. This is typically called the inflammatory phase of wound healing. It's marked by the movement of various immune cells such as neutrophils, lymphocytes, and macrophages into the wounded area to remove cellular debris and prepare the site for healing. The macrophages are considered to be especially important because they produce cytokines and growth factors that promote an increase in the number of fibroblasts, the migration of keratinocytes across the wound bed, and the formation of new blood vessels. All three of these processes are necessary for the remainder of wound healing to occur. Since they're body proteins themselves, increasing the production of immune cells for all of this to occur requires an increased use of amino acids from the amino acid pool. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend. All of these actions help me to reach and help more people. In the International Guideline, the recommendation for protein intake is 1.25 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day. This was labeled as a strong positive recommendation, which according to the text, suggests clinicians should definitely do it in practice. Underneath the recommendation, they provide an evidence summary and evidence discussion. After reading through the studies that they cited in these sections, I must say I was a bit shocked at how little evidence there is to support this recommendation. For instance, one of the major studies their recommendation hinges on is a non-randomized trial by Breslow et al. From 1993. The authors of the International Guideline say it established that individuals receiving higher protein, higher energy diets achieve statistically significant reductions in pressure injury surface area compared to baseline than individuals receiving a standard diet. Yet when you pull up the actual study, you see that the intervention group received an average of 39 calories per kilogram and 2.1 grams of protein per kilogram per day, whereas the control group received an average of 38 calories per kilogram and 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram per day. So, while it does establish that higher protein diets are beneficial to wound healing, it doesn't necessarily suggest that the guideline recommendation of 1.25 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day is optimal, nor does it draw comparison to the RDA or to the recommendation for older adults. Another publication the authors rely on to support their recommendation is a secondary analysis of a clinical trial by Iazaka et al. From 2015. The authors of the International Guideline cite this study as evidence that a change in pressure injury surface area was correlated with both dietary protein and energy intake. Then when you pull up the study, you can see that the researchers just split their subjects into two groups, one that met a protein target and one that didn't. The group that met the protein target did have better wound healing, but to be in it, the subjects only needed to consume at least 0.95 grams per kilogram per day. There's no available data beyond that, so we learn little more than the notion that consuming at least 0.95 grams per kilogram per day is beneficial. In the end, we're really only left with 2 randomized controlled trials to guide the recommendation. The first one is a 2006 study by Lee et al., where nursing home residents were randomized to receive either an additional 45 grams of protein per day or their baseline intake plus a placebo. After 8 weeks, subjects who received the intervention had much better wound healing than those who didn't. However, the intake data for this trial is sparse. Using the baseline characteristics of the sample, it appears that the intervention group would have received approximately 1.4 grams per kilogram per day, compared to around 0.65 for the control group, which is below the RDA. So, it's difficult for me to draw conclusions when it appears the intake of the control group was inadequate from the beginning. The second randomized control trial is a 2011 publication by O'Hara et al. That explored the effects of both energy and protein for patients with enteral nutrition. In this one, the control group got 29 calories per kilogram and 1.24 grams per kilogram, whereas the intervention group got 37.9 calories per kilogram and 1.62 grams per kilogram. Both groups showed improvements in wound size, but the intervention group improved more. This shows that there may be a benefit to increasing protein intake to this level, but overall it's difficult to interpret when the energy load is so different. Not to continue to pile on to the International Guideline, but other questions that go unanswered include: should the protein recommendation change based on stage? In other words, should we be giving closer to 1.25 for a stage 2 pressure injury and closer to 1.5 for a stage 4? Also, how do we account for patients with multiple pressure injuries or concurrent medical conditions that increase protein needs? For example, if a patient has cirrhosis and a stage 3 pressure injury, should the protein recommendation be greater than 1.5? I understand that these questions haven't been answered in the literature, but with such a large group of experts, it would be helpful for them to provide commentary on these issues, and maybe even provide recommendations for them based on expert opinion. While I don't consider myself an expert, my unofficial recommendations are to adjust the recommendation based on stage, giving less for stages 1 and 2, and more for stages 3 and 4. I would also consider going above 1.5 grams per kilogram to account for multiple pressure injuries and/or concurrent medical conditions that increase needs. Another topic related to protein that's mentioned in the literature is amino acid supplements. Specifically, there's been an interest in the role of arginine in wound healing. Under normal circumstances, arginine is a non-essential amino acid, meaning an adequate amount can be produced by the body without direct intake from the diet. However, under periods of illness and stress, it's considered to be conditionally essential, meaning its use in the body outpaces production. Arginine contributes to wound healing by serving as a precursor to nitric oxide, which helps to draw blood to the wounded area in the inflammatory phase. Then it also serves as a substrate in collagen synthesis. Despite there being a theoretical basis for arginine supplementation, trials exploring the effectiveness of it have been mostly influenced by other nutrients. Rather than just testing arginine, or just zinc, or just antioxidants, the vast majority of the trials provide the intervention group with a combination of all of them. To quote a 2019 systematic review by Schneider and Yahia, almost all oral nutritional supplements contained other vitamins and minerals along with arginine. As such, it is difficult to determine if arginine supplementation alone can promote wound healing with the appropriate nursing protocols and adequate protein intake. Therefore, specific recommendations on the use of arginine supplementation alone for wound healing cannot be reached. However, it can be concluded that a high-protein oral nutritional supplement enriched with arginine and other nutrients is more effective at promoting wound healing than a high-protein oral nutritional supplement alone. The authors go on to discuss how a major gap in the literature on arginine is the appropriate dosage to promote wound healing. So far, it appears that supplementation with 4.5 grams per day and 9 grams per day result in no difference in healing rate, suggesting that the potential benefits of arginine are not dose dependent. Findings from the Schneider and Yahia review are consistent with the recommendation from the International Guideline to provide high-calorie, high-protein, arginine, zinc, and antioxidant oral nutritional supplements or enteral formula for adults with a category/stage 2 or greater pressure injury. The strength of this recommendation is weak, meaning clinicians should probably do it in practice. It's also recommended to continue supplementation for at least 4 weeks to achieve the desired effect. In summary, supplementation with arginine may be beneficial, but evidence supporting its use in isolation is lacking, and the optimal dosage is unclear. Adding to our chart of protein needs, we can insert the recommendation from the International Guideline, which sets the standard for pressure injury treatment across the globe. 1.25 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day is the official recommendation. My unofficial recommendations are to give the higher end for stages 3 or 4 and to consider greater than 1.5 with multiple pressure injuries or concurrent medical conditions that increase protein needs. Coming up, we'll look at protein needs in critical illness. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.